At my retirement party, I noticed my daughter-in-law slip something into my champagne. I didn't flinch, I didn't speak, I just smiled and quietly switched glasses when no one was looking. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and tell me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far my story travels. The lights in the ballroom of the Hawthorne Country Club were warm and golden, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks. My son, Ethan, had insisted on renting the entire place for the evening. "You deserve something special, Mom," he'd said. "After selling your company for $23 million, it's time to celebrate you." It was supposed to be one of those perfect nights, the kind that wraps up a life's work with laughter, speeches, and champagne. I'd built my design firm from a single rented desk in a shared office, raised Ethan alone after my husband died, and somehow managed to keep everything standing when the world around me fell apart. Tonight, they said, was to honour that. And yet, as the waiters glided between tables and the jazz trio played softly near the bar, something about the room felt hollow. Ava, my daughter-in-law, looked stunning in emerald silk, her blonde hair swept into a sleek chignon. She had a natural talent for controlling a room without seeming to. People gravitated toward her, drawn to her easy smile and polished charm. But I'd learned long ago that her kindness always came with fine print. She leaned toward a young server, whispering something, then accepted 2 glasses of champagne. Her manicured hand lingered just a second too long near one of them. I watched the faintest motion, a pinch of powder slipping beneath the surface, dissolving in bubbles. It was quick, precise, almost invisible. And yet I saw it. Ava straightened, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened, and handed one of the glasses to me with a smile. Open quote, "To you, Mom," she said softly, "the woman who built everything we have." Close quote. Her tone was honeyed, the kind that coated the knife before it slides in. I held the glass, my pulse steady. Around us, guests clapped politely, expecting a toast. Ethan raised his drink, beaming, oblivious. "To my incredible mother," he said, "a woman who never stopped working and never stopped giving." The room filled with applause. And in that noise, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, the camera flashes, I simply exchanged my glass with the one sitting beside me. Ava's mother's glass. Identical. Golden and untouched. No one noticed. The first sip of champagne fizzed against my lips, light and cold. Across the table, Ava lifted hers, smiling like the perfect daughter-in-law. She didn't realise she was holding the wrong glass. For a moment, time seemed to slow, the way it does before a storm breaks. I looked around the ballroom and thought about the irony of it all. How every person here, business partners, employees, even distant relatives, believed this was my grand farewell to a career. They didn't see what it truly was. The night my family revealed who they really were. Ethan was laughing with the CFO I'd hired 20 years ago, a man who once told me he'd never seen a woman negotiate like me. Ava stood beside him, hand resting on his arm, eyes scanning the room like a predator choosing which piece of meat to taste first. And I, Myrtle Lawson, sat in the centre of the celebration, wondering how something I built with my bare hands could end in such hollow applause. I remembered the first time I met Ava. She'd come to our company's Christmas party wearing a red dress that didn't belong to that office, too glamorous, too deliberate. Ethan was smitten from the start. She was clever, I'll give her that. She never showed her ambition openly. She just smiled, listened, and gathered what she needed. Within a year, she was family. Within 5, she had influence. And tonight, she had a plan. The jazz faded into a gentle hum. Someone tapped a spoon against a glass. "Speech! Speech!" voices called. Ethan turned to me, beaming. "Mom, say something." I stood, smoothing the front of my silver dress. The silk caught the light like water. I could feel Ava watching me, that poised, confident gaze that never missed a detail. "Thank you," I began, my voice calm. "Tonight means more than you know, not because of the money, not because of the success, but because of the people who stood beside me. And those who pretended to." A few polite laughs scattered through the crowd, unsure if I was joking. "I built this company with integrity," I continued. "I taught my son that trust is the only currency that never loses its value. I hope he remembers that." My eyes drifted to Ava. She smiled tightly, her fingers twitching around the stem of her glass. Now, I said softly, raising my champagne to the next chapter. Glasses clinked, bubbles shimmered. I didn't drink again. I just watched Ava take another sip, watched the colour drain from her face, watched her smile falter just slightly before she turned toward her mother. The room blurred with applause again, loud, bright, empty. And in that noise, I felt something settle inside me. Not fear, not anger. Something colder, resolution. As the evening went on, laughter returned. The jazz picked up tempo. Ava excused herself once, then again looking pale. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy introducing me to a group of investors, telling them about my retirement villa in Florida. No one suspected a thing, but I did. I had all night to wonder. What had she planned for me? What did she expect to happen when I drank that glass? I glanced at her again across the room. She was smiling now, but her eyes darted, searching for control she no longer had. And I thought to myself, you shouldn't have underestimated me, dear. That was the night everything changed, not because I almost died, but because for the first time I realized who my family really was, and what I was still capable of. The morning after my retirement party, the world looked too bright. The Florida sun pushed through the curtains like it had something to prove. I sat at the kitchen table, still in the silver dress from last night, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of me. My lipstick had faded, but the faint shimmer of champagne still lingered on my tongue. The newspaper on the counter carried a small headline about the celebration. Local entrepreneur retires after selling company for $23 million. The photo showed me holding my glass, smiling. Beside me stood Ethan and Ava, his hand around her waist, her eyes slightly unfocused. I traced the image with my finger. The picture looked perfect. It always did. The silence in the house was thicker than usual. My phone buzzed twice, missed calls from Ethan. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say yet. I knew he would call, worried, confused. Maybe Ava had told him she wasn't feeling well, that something she ate didn't sit right. Maybe she hadn't told him anything at all. I let the calls ring out, the sound of his voice on voicemail, "Mom, call me back, okay?" was both familiar and foreign. He sounded like the boy he used to be, before ambition and love got mixed up and turned into something else. On the counter, a half-empty bottle of champagne sat next to a vase of white roses someone had sent from the firm. The note read, "To Myrtle Lawson, a legend in her field." I almost laughed. Legends were only celebrated until they stopped being useful. I picked up one of the roses. The stem was already wilting, petals soft, heavy with last night's perfume. That smell still clung to me. Expensive perfume, sweat, and the faint metallic edge of something that wasn't supposed to be in my drink. I didn't know what Ava had planned exactly. Sleeping pills, maybe? Something mild enough to make me seem confused, delirious. Something she could use to say, "Mom's not well, she needs rest." If I had drunk it, maybe by now I'd be in a hospital bed, surrounded by kind nurses and whispered plans about power of attorney. Instead, I was here, awake, watching the morning light crawl across the table like truth itself. At 10:15, the doorbell rang. Once, twice, impatient, I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, still in his suit from last night, tie loosened, eyes frantic. "Mom, thank God! You didn't answer. Ava's sick. We had to take her mother to the hospital early this morning. Food poisoning, they said. She collapsed right after we got home." His words came fast, jumbled, like he was trying to outrun them. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said quietly. He frowned. "You don't seem surprised." I met his gaze. "After last night, very little surprises me anymore." He blinked, confused, maybe even offended. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I turned back toward the kitchen. "You want some coffee?" He followed me inside, muttering something about ambulances and stress. I poured him a cup, watching his hands tremble slightly as he reached for it. "She kept saying it wasn't her fault," he said finally. "That maybe it was a reaction to the champagne." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Maybe." He glanced up. "You think it's something else?" "I think," I said, setting the spoon down, "that sometimes people drink what they meant for someone else." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in years I saw the boy who used to hide behind my legs when thunder rolled through the house. "Mom," he said softly, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying," I replied, that I hope Ava's mother makes a full recovery. The clock ticked between us, the kind of silence that doesn't end with comfort but with understanding. He left soon after, promising to call with updates. When the door closed, I exhaled for the first time since the toast. I walked to the study, the one room in this house that still felt like mine. The framed newspaper articles, the patent certificates, the family photos arranged too neatly. On the desk sat the manila folder I'd given Ethan last night, still unopened. He'd left it behind in his hurry. I slid it toward me, opened it, and saw the documents I'd prepared weeks earlier. Final transfers, new trust accounts, a sealed envelope marked for Ethan only after Ava. I had always been a planner. People think intuition is luck. They don't realise it's just experience wearing quiet shoes. The phone rang again. Unknown number, I answered. Mrs. Lawson? This is Detective Price from Clearwater PD. We're contacting guests from your event last night. My stomach didn't twist. My voice stayed even. Of course that is something wrong. There was an incident reported involving a guest who became ill. Standard procedure. We're gathering statements. I understand, I said. You'll want the security footage from the ballroom. The club keeps it for 30 days. A pause. Then, you're very well informed, ma'am. I smiled to myself. Old habits. I built a company on documentation. When the call ended, I stood for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The sound felt louder than it should. Outside, the sky had turned grey. A storm was building offshore, one of those sudden coastal tempests that arrived without warning. I stepped onto the porch, feeling the wind lift my hair, carrying the scent of rain and sea salt. I thought of Ava, of the precision with which she had timed everything, the way she smiled when she thought she was winning. Maybe she'd planned to slip me something mild, or maybe she'd gone further than that. I'd probably never know, but I knew what I saw, and more importantly, I knew what I didn't drink. That night, the news carried a brief mention of an unfortunate medical emergency at a private celebration. They never said my name, they never said hers, but people talk, they always do. By the following week, I received an email from the club's manager. He attached a still frame from the security feed. Ava's hand hovering above a champagne glass, the glint of metal, the reflection of my silver dress in the background. I saved the image, not out of vengeance, out of clarity. When Ethan came by again 2 days later, he looked different, tired, cautious. She's saying someone must have tampered with the drinks, he said. That maybe it wasn't her fault. I met his eyes. Of course she is. She wants to apologise to you, he added. She says she didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I set down my tea. She's right about one thing, he frowned. What's that? She didn't mean for anyone else to get hurt. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked away, jaw tight. I don't know what to think anymore. That's good, I said softly. Thinking is a start. When he left, I sat alone again at the same table, the same silver light spilling through the blinds. The roses were gone now. Only the faint outline of where the vase had been remained, a circle of moisture drying into nothing. In that emptiness, I felt something settle that wasn't bitterness. It was something cleaner, sharper, the knowledge that silence can guard you better than any lock. I lifted my cup, letting the steam brush my face. To anyone else, it was just a morning like any other. To me, it was the morning after I refused to die quietly, and for the first time in years, the air tasted like freedom. 3 days passed before I heard from Ethan again. The first 2 were quiet, filled with small routines that didn't make sense anymore, watering plants I didn't care for, reheating meals I barely tasted, checking the front gate though no one came. By the 3rd morning, the silence felt like a wall. When the doorbell rang, I didn't rush. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door to find him standing there, eyes red, shirt wrinkled, a man who hadn't slept properly since the party. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. He stepped inside, shoulders heavy, the scent of hospital antiseptic clinging to his clothes. He sat at the table, the same place we'd shared coffee days earlier. "Ava's mother's awake," he said quietly. "She's still weak, but the doctors think she'll recover." "That's good news," I replied. He hesitated. "They ran tests. Whatever was in her system, it wasn't food poisoning." I waited. "It was a sedative," he said. "A strong one." I set my teacup down carefully. "I see." He leaned forward. "Mom, did you Did you notice anything strange that night? Anything at all? The clock ticked behind him. A gull cried somewhere near the shore. I met his eyes. I noticed your wife had excellent aim. His face tightened. That's not funny. It wasn't meant to be. He pushed his hands through his hair, sighing. The police talked to her. She said she must have mixed up the glasses now that she took the wrong one. They're still deciding what to do. I folded my hands on the table. And what do you believe? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. After he left, I walked through the house, touching the furniture like I was checking if it still belonged to me. Every surface gleamed, every corner silent. Success looks different when no one you love stands beside it. In the living room, the piano sat untouched. Ethan used to press the keys when he was little, just enough to make sound, but not enough to play a tune. I'd scold him gently, then smile when he ran off laughing. I could still hear the echo of that sound sometimes, before Ava's laughter replaced it. I sat at the piano now and pressed one key. The note lingered, sharp and lonely. That was when I decided to visit the office one last time. The building still smelled of coffee and ambition. The receptionist blinked in surprise when she saw me. Mrs. Lawson? I thought, well, after the sale. I just came to pick up a few personal files, I said. She nodded, offering a nervous smile. People don't know how to behave around you when they've already said goodbye. I walked through the glass doors into what used to be my domain. The new nameplate, Lawson Group, a subsidiary of Holland Investments, still looked too clean, too foreign. The air conditioning hummed softly, pretending everything was the same. Inside my old office, the desk was just as I'd left it, neat, impersonal, stripped of life, but the smell of cedar polish brought everything back, the late nights, the arguments, the pride. And behind all that, the slow erosion of trust that started the moment Ethan married Ava. I opened the bottom drawer. My journals were still there, wrapped in a silk scarf. I took them out, feeling the worn edges. Years of entries, notes about deals, clients, mistakes I never admitted aloud. A record of a life built one decision at a time. At the back of the drawer, a small flash drive glinted under the papers. I'd forgotten about it. Or maybe I hadn't. I slipped it into my purse. That evening, I called Ruth, my oldest friend, the one who had stood beside me through the early years. We hadn't spoken in months. She answered on the second ring. Myrtle? Good Lord, you sound different. Older, stronger, she said. I saw something on the news. They didn't use names, but I knew it was your party. I smiled faintly. You always did have good instincts. You okay? I'm breathing. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now. She was quiet for a moment. Do you want me to come by? Not yet, I said. There's something I need to finish first. That night, I opened my laptop and inserted the flash drive. The screen blinked and a folder appeared. Holland Negotiations, private. Inside were copies of emails, Ava's name in several threads, CC'd where she shouldn't have been, confidential attachments, contract drafts, transfers, all time-stamped from Ethan's account. She'd been preparing for my exit long before I ever planned it. A letter to an offshore attorney caught my eye. Open quote, once the sale finalizes, ensure remaining shares are consolidated under joint marital property. She trusts her son implicitly. Close quote. I stared at the words until the room blurred. She hadn't just wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to erase me. The following morning, I printed a few pages and sealed them in an envelope. On the front, I wrote, to Detective Price, confidential evidence. I didn't send it, not yet. Timing mattered more than revenge. Timing was survival. Instead, I drove to the hospital. Ava was sitting in a wheelchair near the window of her mother's room, phone in hand, looking small for the first time since I'd known her. She didn't notice me until I spoke. Good morning. Her head snapped up. Mrs. Lawson, Don't strain yourself, I said softly. I only came to see how she's doing. She's better, Ava murmured. They said she'll be discharged in a few days. That's good to hear. An awkward silence stretched between us. Machines beeped softly in the background. You must be exhausted, I added. She hesitated. I didn't mean for what? Her lips trembled. For things to get out of hand. I nodded. They usually do when people lose control of their own greed. Her eyes flickered, a tiny spark of defiance returning. You think you know everything, don't you? No, I said. Just enough. I turned to leave. Myrtle, she said suddenly, voice shaking. I was trying to protect Ethan. You were going to cut him off. I paused at the door. Protect him from what? A life where he has to earn something for himself? She didn't answer. I walked out before she could find another lie. That evening, the sky opened up again. Thunder rolling over the coast, rain pounding against the glass. I sat in the study with the printed emails spread out like a storm of their own. People think betrayal comes all at once, like a knife, but it doesn't. It seeps. It drips slowly through the cracks of trust until everything you built rots from the inside. I folded the papers and placed them in the safe. Not to hide them, but to remind myself, evidence is patience made visible. When Ethan called that night, his voice was quiet. "Mom, she says you came to see her." "I did. She's scared. She thinks you'll ruin her." I looked out the window, watching the lightning split the clouds. I don't have to ruin anyone. Truth has a way of doing that on its own. He didn't speak for a long time. "I found the envelope you left at my place," he said finally. "The one labelled after Ava." "Huh? And? I haven't opened it yet." "Good," I said. "You'll know when the time's right." The line crackled, then went silent. When I hung up, I felt the weight of years lifting piece by piece. I thought about my husband, about the promises we made when the company was still just a dream. Build something honest, he'd said, even if no one notices. Maybe honesty was all I had left now. I poured myself a small glass of champagne, not for celebration, but for closure. The bubbles rose, catching the light like tiny fragments of memory. "To clarity," I whispered. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, the air was calm. And for the first time since that night at the ballroom, I let the silence feel like peace, not punishment. The next week moved slowly, each day stretching longer than it should have. The neighbours waved from their driveways when I walked to the mailbox, unaware of the quiet storm still circling my life. I answered no questions, returned no calls that didn't matter, and kept my movements deliberate. Calmness unsettles people who expect guilt. On Thursday morning, I drove to the lawyer's office, the same oak-panelled building where I'd signed every major contract of my career. The secretary recognised me immediately. "Mrs. Lawson, it's been too long." "It has," I said. "I need to update my will." Inside the meeting room, my attorney, Mr. Heller, looked surprised but pleased. "Congratulations again on the sale," he said, flipping through papers. "I assume we're distributing assets between Ethan and—" "Just Ethan," I interrupted, "but with conditions." He looked up. "Conditions?" I handed him a typed sheet. "Everything remains under his name, only if he manages the funds independently. No joint accounts, no shared authority, no power of attorney signed to anyone else." "May I ask why?" "Because I built an empire trusting the wrong people. I don't intend to leave it that way." He studied my face for a moment before nodding. "I'll make the revisions today." When I stepped back outside, the wind smelled like sea salt and new beginnings. By evening, the phone rang again. Detective Price. His voice was calm, neutral, but there was weight behind every word. "Mrs. Lawson, thank you for the evidence you forwarded," he said. I leaned back in my chair. "I didn't send everything." "I gathered as much," he replied, "but what you did provide clarifies the sequence of events. We've reviewed the footage. The powder was identified. The sedative dosage could have caused loss of consciousness." "So it wasn't an accident," I said. "It doesn't appear so." "And Ava?" "She's been advised to stay available for further questioning. She's cooperating. For now." He paused. "I understand this must be difficult for you." "Detective," I said quietly, "after 70 years on this earth, very little is difficult anymore." The night sky was clear when I ended the call. I walked to the patio, barefoot on the cool tile, and listened to the ocean. Somewhere out there, waves were folding over themselves, erasing the traces of everything that came before. I envied them. The phone buzzed again, a message from Ethan. "I need to see you. Tonight." He arrived an hour later, no suit this time, just jeans, a tired face, and then the look of a man who'd finally seen what he didn't want to see. "Mom," he said, voice raw. "She confessed." I said nothing. "She told them she panicked, that she thought you were planning to rewrite the inheritance. She said she only wanted to." His voice broke. "She said she just wanted to make you sleep through the night so she could fix things." "She wanted control," I said softly. He nodded. "They might press charges. They'll question me too." "Let them." He sank into the chair across from me, rubbing his temples. "I don't know how to process any of this. I loved her, Mom." I know. She said you hated her. I didn't hate her, I said. I just saw her. He looked at me, tears threatening. And now? Now, I whispered. You see her too. Later, after he left, I sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen. I thought about all the years I spent building, providing, protecting, how love can blind you faster than deceit ever will. I remembered the day Ethan brought Ava home for the first time. She'd brought wine, expensive and unnecessary, and called me Mrs. Lawson like we were business partners. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself she'd soften with time. But people rarely soften. They sharpen. The wine that night had tasted metallic, the way the champagne did weeks ago. Maybe I should have known then that sweetness always came with something bitter underneath. The following day, the newspapers carried the story in small print. Socialite questioned in sedative incident at celebration. Names omitted, but anyone close to our circle would understand. My phone filled with polite texts disguised as concern. So sorry for what you're going through. If you need anything, I'm here. They didn't mean it. People never mean it. They just want to know the ending before it reaches them. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I cleaned the house, methodically. Every surface, every window, every trace of last month's chaos. I threw away the champagne bottles, the leftover decorations from the party, even the photos. When I reached the one of Ethan and Ava at their wedding, I hesitated. They looked perfect, too perfect. I set it face down. That evening, I opened the safe again. The flash drive, the printed evidence, the journals, all there. I added one more thing, a handwritten letter addressed to Ethan. Open quote. If you're reading this, it means you've decided to face what's true. Don't hate her. Hate the part of yourself that refused to see. Learn from it. Then let it go. Close quote. I sealed it, pressed the edges flat, and placed it on top of the documents. The air outside shifted, warm and soft. I opened the window, letting the night in. A few days later, Ruth came by. She brought pie, pretending it was a casual visit, but I could see the worry behind her eyes. Your name's been floating around town, she said gently. It always has, I replied. They're saying you outsmarted her. I didn't outsmart anyone, I just didn't drink. She stared for a long moment, then laughed, short, disbelieving. You really are impossible. Not impossible, I said. Prepared. We ate in silence for a while. Then she asked, what happens now? I rebuild, just smaller. That night after Ruth left, I sat by the window with my notebook. The pages smelled of ink and sea air. I began writing again, not company plans or financial records, but thoughts. Quiet confessions to no one but myself. Success means nothing if you can't trust the people who raise their glasses to you. Money can buy silence, but it can't buy sincerity. I used to think forgiveness made you weak. Now I know it just means you've stopped needing anything from them. The words flowed until the sky began to pale. I closed the book. A week later, Ethan called again. His voice was calmer this time. They're not pressing charges. She agreed to leave town for a while. Maybe forever. Good, I said. I'm filing for divorce. I said nothing. He took a breath. Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. I did give up once, I said. It just didn't last. He laughed softly through the static. Will you be okay? I already am. When the call ended, I looked around the room. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. The next morning, I went down to the dock behind the house. The water was still, a mirror of the early sun. I poured the last of the champagne into the bay, watching the bubbles dissolve into the tide. Then I whispered, to beginnings that don't need applause. The sound of the ocean answered back, steady and endless. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched or tested or underestimated. I just felt alive. That night, I locked away the journals and shut off the lights. The house exhaled around me, the way old things do when they're finally at rest. Before I went to bed, I caught my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd stood at that ballroom weeks ago. She was smaller, yes, but sharper. She'd learned the quiet art of survival, and as I closed the curtain, I whispered the truth that had carried me through it all. Sometimes, the only toast worth raising is the one you drink alone. 2 months later, the house finally settled into its own kind of quiet. No reporters, no police calls, no nervous neighbours pretending to be concerned. The only sound most mornings was the ocean scraping against the rocks beyond the porch. That sound used to make me feel small. Now it made me feel free. Ethan visited once a week. He'd stopped asking how I was doing. I think he finally realised I preferred silence over sympathy. The divorce papers had been filed, the settlement pending. Ava had moved out of the city, maybe out of the state. Rumour said she was staying with an aunt in Oregon. I didn't care enough to confirm it. When he came by that morning, he brought groceries. Simple things. Milk, eggs, bread. Things I hadn't bought in years because someone else always did. I didn't know what you needed, he said. Peace, I replied. He gave a tired smile. Can't buy that at the store. Exactly. He lingered by the kitchen window, that eyes fixed on the waves. I keep replaying that night, he said, trying to figure out the moment everything went wrong. It didn't go wrong, I said. It just revealed itself. He looked down. You always talk like that. Calm. Detached. How can you be so sure of everything? I'm not sure of everything, I said. I'm just done pretending I don't see. When he left, I brewed another pot of coffee. The air was thick with the smell of roasted beans and salt water. Outside, gulls circled over the dock. The sunlight hit the water in silver shards. I watched it flicker and thought about time, how it always moves forward whether we're ready or not. There was a stack of mail on the counter. One envelope caught my eye. No return address, neat handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no greeting, no signature, just one sentence. You should have drunk it. I folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer beside the stove. Fear didn't visit me often anymore, but when it did, I made it sit quietly in the corner until it left on its own. That afternoon, I went to the community centre downtown. It was something Ruth had convinced me to try. Keep your mind busy, she said. I signed up for a workshop about mentoring young entrepreneurs. Most of them were barely 30, eyes full of eagerness and caffeine. When I introduced myself, a few gasped. They'd read about me in business magazines years ago. You're the Myrtle Lawson? One girl asked. Last time I checked, I said. They wanted advice on success. I told them to watch who poured their drinks. They laughed, thinking it was a joke. I didn't correct them. After the session, a young woman approached me. Her handshake was firm. My mother used to work for you, she said. She said you were tough but fair. Fairness costs less than kindness, I told her. It lasts longer too. She smiled like she understood. Maybe she did. That evening, I returned home to find a voicemail. Detective Price again. His voice carried the same patient tone as before. Mrs. Lawson, just an update. Case closed. Evidence reviewed. No further action required. The subject has relocated. If anything changes, we'll inform you. I deleted the message, not out of relief but out of certainty. Some endings didn't need punctuation. I stepped outside with a glass of iced tea. The horizon was burning orange. The air smelled of coming rain. I watched the tide crawl in, swallowing the last bit of sand. For a long time, I thought about the things that almost broke me. The betrayals, the silence, the way family can twist love into leverage. Then I thought about what survived. A week later, Ruth dropped by again. She carried a newspaper folded under her arm. You made the business section, she said. I raised an eyebrow. I haven't done anything worth printing. They wrote about your mentorship program, called you a pillar of resilience. I laughed. That's just a polite way of saying I refuse to die. She sat down, handed me the paper. You know, not everyone would have handled things the way you did. I didn't handle it, I said. I endured it. There's a difference. Ruth studied me, eyes soft. You still think about her, don't you? Sometimes, I admitted. Mostly when I'm pouring a drink. After she left, I took a walk along the pier. The air carried a bite of autumn now. Boats rocked gently against their ropes. The sun dipped low, turning the water to liquid gold. A fisherman recognized me. Evening, Mrs. Lawson. How's retirement treating you? I smiled. Like a mirror, it shows me what I've avoided. He laughed without understanding. Most people don't. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the study, turned on the lamp, and opened the journal again. The pen hovered above the page for a while before words finally came. I used to think power meant being heard. Now I know it means choosing silence when you could speak. People ask if I forgive her. I don't. But I also don't carry her anymore. She's gone, and so is the part of me that needed to win. I closed the book and let the light fall across my hands. The skin was thinner now, marked by years, but steady. I traced the veins that still pulsed beneath the surface. Proof of life, proof of endurance. In the weeks that followed, I started hosting small dinners. Nothing fancy. Soup, bread, maybe wine. Friends from the workshop came by. They called me Miss Myrtle, even though I told them not to. The house filled with laughter again, the real kind. Not polite applause, not staged affection, just noise that meant life was still happening. Sometimes when the night ended and everyone left, I'd stand by the sink, rinsing glasses, listening to the sound of running water. It reminded me of the champagne that night, the bubbles, the reflection, the risk. But I never felt bitterness anymore, just awareness. One evening, Ethan came with a box of old photos. "I thought you'd want these back," he said. Inside were pictures of him as a child, our old house, the first office we ever rented, and one photo of him and Ava at the company gala, the last time they ever looked like a team. He looked at it for a long time. "She called," he said. "Wanted to apologize. I told her it was too late. Maybe that's all she needed to hear. Maybe." He set the photo aside. "You were right, about everything." "No," I said. "I was just paying attention." That night, after he left, I stepped outside again. The air was crisp, the sky full of stars. I thought about the strange shape of survival, the way it doesn't roar, it whispers. I whispered back. "To peace," I said softly. "The kind you earn, not the kind they give." The wind carried the words out to sea. Inside, the clock ticked, steady and patient. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine, and raised it to the quiet. Whatever came next, whatever loneliness, whatever memory, I knew one thing for certain. I was still here. And sometimes, that was enough. Autumn arrived quietly, the kind that sneaks into the air before you even notice the leaves changing. The mornings were cooler now, the sea slower. I woke earlier than usual, drawn to the hush before sunrise. There's something honest about those minutes before light touches everything. The world doesn't pretend yet. I made coffee, the smell filling the house. It was the same routine every day, but repetition can be a comfort. When you've survived enough chaos, predictability becomes a kind of prayer. The phone rang once. It was Ethan. "Morning, Mom," he said. His voice was lighter these days. "Just checking in." "Good morning," I answered, pouring coffee into my favourite mug, the chipped blue one my husband used to love. "I wanted to tell you I got the final paperwork from the lawyers," he said. "The divorce is official." I didn't respond right away. The ocean outside was restless, small waves tapping against the dock. "I'm sorry it came to that," I said finally. He exhaled. "I'm not. I should have done it sooner. She tried calling again last week. I didn't answer." "Good," I said. "Sometimes not answering is the best kind of closure." He chuckled softly. "You always make silence sound like wisdom." Because it is. After the call, I stood by the window and watched the light creep over the horizon. The sky was a mixture of lavender and gold, colours too beautiful for a world so cruel. And I thought about how everything eventually balances itself. The storms, the lies, the people. On the table lay yesterday's mail. One envelope was from a foundation I didn't recognise. Inside was a letter asking if I would consider mentoring women starting small businesses after loss. Widows, mothers, women trying to rebuild. I read it twice. Then I set it aside, unsure if I was ready to be needed again. Being needed can be dangerous. It makes you forget how close survival and surrender can look when they wear the same face. By mid-afternoon, Ruth showed up unannounced. She was the only person who did. "You're becoming hard to find," she said, handing me a bag of oranges from her garden. "I've been right here," I said. "Exactly," she replied. "Too much here isn't good for you." She moved around the kitchen like she used to when we were younger, chatting about her grandkids, her neighbour's new dog, and the local gossip that never changes. I let her talk. Some voices fill the silence without demanding anything back. When she finally paused, she looked at me carefully. "Have you forgiven her yet?" I didn't answer right away. "She's out there living with the choices she made," I said. "That's enough punishment." Ruth nodded slowly. "You always did believe in quiet justice. It's the only kind that lasts." That evening, after Ruth left, I found myself sitting in the study again. The journals were still there. I opened one at random. A page dated from years ago caught my eye. "Don't build something that can outlive your soul," I had written. "Otherwise, you'll end up serving what was meant to serve you." I smiled faintly. Back then, I thought success would protect me from loneliness. I was wrong. Success only amplifies it. I took a clean page and wrote, "Maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you build quietly, the same way you once built everything else." The next morning, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there holding a cardboard box. "What's this?" I asked. "Dad's old records," he said. "I found them in storage. Thought you might want them." Inside were vinyl albums, Coltrane, Sinatra, Miles Davis, the soundtrack of our home decades ago. "Play them," he said, smiling. "The speakers still work." He stayed for lunch. We didn't talk much about Ava or the past. Instead, he told me about his new job, consulting for a local firm, starting fresh. There was a steadiness in him now that reminded me of his father. Before he left, he hugged me. It wasn't the quick, distracted hug of obligation. It was real, solid. "You did everything right," he whispered. "No one ever does everything right," I said, but I learned enough to stop repeating what's wrong. That night, I put on one of the records, "Fly Me to the Moon." The needle crackled, then music filled the air, soft and grainy like memory itself. I poured a glass of wine, though I barely drank any more. I let the song play while I walked through each room, touching the walls, the furniture, the past. Every corner of the house held echoes, laughter, arguments, the clink of glasses, the sound of a younger version of myself believing family meant safety. Now it meant endurance. When the record ended, I sat on the couch and whispered to no one. I survived. Not as a victory, just as a fact. Days slipped by in their quiet rhythm. I accepted the invitation from the foundation. They scheduled my first session for the following Monday. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I was curious to see what I still had to give. The first group gathered in a sunlit room above a cafe downtown. 6 women, all at different stages of starting over. I told them my name, my background, and that I wasn't there to teach success. "I'm here to talk about survival," I said, "because it's the only skill no one teaches you until you've already needed it." They nodded, listening closely. One woman asked, "How do you start again after betrayal?" I smiled. "By understanding it wasn't your fault that someone mistook your kindness for weakness." Another asked, "Do you ever stop being angry?" I paused. "Anger burns itself out eventually. What's left after that is clarity, and that's worth keeping." By the end of the hour, I realized I was speaking to the version of myself who once sat in that same silence. It was strange and healing all at once. When I came home, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful. I made tea, opened the windows and let the wind move through the rooms like forgiveness. Ethan called again that evening. "You sound different," he said. "I am." "What changed?" I stopped waiting for apologies that wouldn't come. He didn't say anything. Then softly, "I love you, Mom." "I know," I said. "I never doubted that, not even when you did." Later that night, rain began to fall. I stood at the doorway, watching the drops hit the steps, small and certain. The smell of wet earth mixed with salt carried through the air. For a moment I thought of Ava again. I imagined her somewhere, far away, looking out another windowsill, maybe holding her own regrets like fragile glass. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't need to. Some lessons are written in pain, others in silence. Hers was both. I went to bed early, leaving the windows open to the sound of rain. The wind brushed the curtains, cool and soft against my skin. Before I drifted off, I whispered into the dark, not to anyone in particular, but to the universe itself. I did what I had to do, and I am still here. The storm outside softened, like it was listening. In the quiet between thunder and dawn, I slept without dreams for the first time in years. Winter arrived with a whisper instead of a storm. The mornings were slow and silver, fog curling low over the water. The world seemed quieter, as if even the waves had grown tired of talking. I didn't mind. Quiet had become my favourite company. I still woke before sunrise. Old habits don't die, they just soften. I brewed coffee, pulled on my cardigan, and sat by the kitchen window. The house smelled faintly of cedar and sea air. Outside, a heron stood on the dock, motionless, waiting for something beneath the surface. Watching him, I realized that's what healing looked like, standing still until the right thing appeared. The mentorship program had grown faster than I expected. What started as a single meeting had turned into weekly sessions. Women came from nearby towns, sometimes just to sit and listen. They didn't need solutions, they needed space to breathe. One of them, a woman named Carla, stayed behind after class one day. Her husband had left her with 2 kids and a stack of unpaid bills. She said she was tired of feeling stupid for trusting him. "You're not stupid," I told her. "You were hopeful. That's not a weakness, it's just dangerous when placed in the wrong hands." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "How did you stop being angry?" "I didn't stop," I said. "I just stopped letting anger choose what I did next." She smiled a little then, the kind of smile that means a person finally believes they might survive. Ethan came by more often now. He brought food, fixed small things around the house, asked about my classes. We'd begun to talk the way we used to before life got complicated. One evening, as he was changing a light bulb in the hallway, he said, "I've been thinking about moving back here for a while. Maybe buy a place nearby." "You hate the quiet," I said. "Not anymore." He climbed down from the ladder and looked at me. "You were right, you know. About her, about everything, I just didn't want to see it." "Most people don't," I said. "Love makes us blind until the light hurts too much to ignore." He gave a small laugh. "You should write that down." "I already did," I said. "Years ago." A few days later, a letter arrived. Oregon postmark. My hands didn't tremble when I saw it, but something inside me stilled. I opened it carefully. "Myrtle, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I understand now. The things I thought I wanted, they were never mine to take. I hope Ethan's okay. I hope you are too. Ava." There was no return address, no apology that asked for anything, just words. I folded the letter and placed it between the pages of my journal. Some truths don't need to be spoken aloud, they just need to exist. That night, I dreamed of the party again. The music, the lights, the glass in my hand. But this time, no one switched drinks, no one plotted anything. It was just me standing under the chandeliers, watching the room fade into light. When I woke, I didn't feel haunted anymore. Weeks passed. The mentorship group held a small event downtown, a showcase for the women's new businesses. I sat in the front row watching them talk about their projects, handmade jewellery, a bakery, a flower shop. Each story had the same beginning, loss, and the same ending, starting again anyway. When they called me on stage to speak, I almost refused. Then I remembered the girl who once believed success would shield her from pain. She deserved to hear what came after. I took the microphone and said, "We spend half our lives building walls to keep the hurt out, and the other half realizing the walls also keep us in. So here's my advice. Stop waiting for the world to be kind. Build your own kindness and guard it like treasure." The room was silent, then filled with applause. I smiled, not the way I used to smile for cameras, but with something real this time. After the event, I walked to the pier. The wind was sharp, the kind that makes your eyes water. The sea stretched endless and silver beneath the fading sun. I leaned on the railing and let the cold bite my cheeks. I thought about the letter again, about Ava, about all the pieces of life that had tried to break me and failed. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting, it's about outlasting the noise. That weekend, Ethan helped me decorate for Christmas. We hadn't done it in years. The smell of pine filled the house, mingling with cinnamon and old memories. He hung the lights and I arranged the ornaments, small glass globes from our first Christmas with his father, the same ones I used to protect from tiny hands decades ago. At one point, he turned to me and said, "You never told me what you did with the company money." "It's still there," I said, "invested, protected, waiting for the right reason to be used." He frowned. "What reason?" "Something that matters more than pride." He didn't press. That was progress too. That night after he left, I couldn't sleep. I poured myself a small glass of water and sat by the tree. The lights blinked softly, reflecting off the window. Each flash looked like a heartbeat. I thought of my husband, his steady hands, his calm voice, the way he used to say, "You can rebuild anything, Myrtle, except time, so spend it wisely." He was right. I spent so many years proving I could endure that I forgot endurance isn't living, it's surviving. Maybe it was time to live again. In January, I transferred part of my savings to start a fund for women in the mentorship program. Small grants, no interest, no strings, just trust. When I told Ruth, she stared at me. "You sure about this?" "Completely," I said. "If I could rebuild strangers for decades in business, I can invest in people who still believe in goodness." She shook her head, smiling. You really did turn survival into an art form. Maybe, I said, but art needs purpose. On a grey morning, near the end of winter, I received one final call from Detective Price. I wanted to let you know, he said. The case is officially sealed. No further contact expected. Thank you, I said. He paused. You handled everything with remarkable composure, Mrs. Lawson. I've had practice, I replied. When the call ended, I walked out to the porch. The sea was calm again. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a threat. It just was. I closed my eyes and let the wind pass over me. The past didn't echo anymore. It hummed softly like background music to something new. That evening, Ethan came over with dinner. We ate in the living room, the fire crackling between us. After a while, he said, Mom, what are you going to do now? I smiled. Live quietly, help people who need to find their footing again, and maybe, finally, learn to enjoy being still. He nodded. You deserve that. I looked at him, my grown son who once couldn't see past the smile of a woman who nearly destroyed us. So do you. He smiled back, and in that moment, everything felt simple again. No wealth, no legacy, no scars, just two people who finally saw each other clearly. Later, after he left, I stepped out into the cool night. The moon hung low, casting light across the waves. I whispered the same words I'd said the night of the party, though this time they meant something entirely different. To the next chapter. The wind carried the words away, and I let it. Because some stories don't end with revenge or redemption. They end when peace finally feels like home. Spring came early that year. The air grew softer, the mornings brighter, and the sea outside my window lost its winter edge. Flowers began to push through the soil near the porch, tiny bursts of yellow and violet against the grey wood. I hadn't planted them. Nature has a way of filling empty spaces when you stop trying to control them. I still woke before dawn. The habit never left me. Some mornings I'd walk down to the dock barefoot, letting the cold boards ground me. The water was calm, clear enough to see my reflection if I leaned close. I used to avoid mirrors. Now I met my own eyes without flinching. The mentorship program had become part of my life. Twice a week I drove into town and sat in that small sunlit room, listening to women talk about what they'd lost and what they were trying to rebuild. I didn't tell them much about myself anymore. I didn't have to. They could read the story in my pauses. One morning after class, Carla handed me a small box. Inside was a bracelet made of polished seashells. You taught me how to stop apologizing for surviving, she said, so I made this for you. I turned the bracelet over in my hand, feeling its smooth edges. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she said. You remind me that silence can be strength. When she left, I sat there a long while, turning the bracelet in my palm until the sunlight caught the white curve of each shell. A week later, Ethan invited me to dinner at his new place, a small house on the edge of town, quiet, surrounded by oak trees. He'd painted the walls himself, pale blue like the sky after rain. He cooked, not well, but with effort. The food didn't matter. The gesture did. Feels strange, he said as we sat down. Cooking for you, it's supposed to be the other way around. Times change, I said. People do too. He looked at me for a long moment. I wish Dad could see us now. He'd be proud, I said. You finally learned what real strength looks like, which is knowing when to let go. We ate mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't demand anything back. When I left, he hugged me and said, I don't know how you did it, Mom, all of it. I just didn't stop, I said. That's all survival ever is. The following weekend, I visited my husband's grave for the first time in years. The cemetery was quiet, the air heavy with spring rain. I brought a single lily and brushed the leaves away from his name. I finally stopped trying to fix everything, I whispered. You were right. It's not my job to hold the world together. A breeze moved through the trees, and I swear I felt him there, the way he always did, steady, wordless, just watching over me. I stayed until the rain started, then walked back to the car, soaked but lighter. That night, back home, I found another letter in the mail. Oregon again. The handwriting was smaller this time. Myrtle, I don't know why I keep writing, maybe because I can't talk to anyone else. I've started therapy. They say I need to forgive myself. I don't know how. Ava. I folded the letter, slid it into the drawer with the first one. I didn't answer. Some silences are meant to stay unbroken. Still, part of me hoped she'd keep writing, maybe because forgiveness doesn't always need a receiver, it just needs space to exist. In May, the foundation held a gala for the mentorship program. They wanted me to speak again, but this time on a bigger stage, under brighter lights. I almost said no. I didn't like attention anymore, but Ruth convinced me. "You've spent your life building other people," she said. "Let them see who taught them how." The ballroom was smaller than the one where everything once went wrong, but it smelled the same: flowers, perfume, champagne. I stood behind the curtain, steadying my breath as the host introduced me. When I stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell quiet. "I used to believe that silence meant weakness," I began, "that if I didn't fight back, I'd be forgotten. But I've learned silence can be power too. The kind that listens, the kind that waits, the kind that survives." I told them about the women in the program, about rebuilding lives without revenge, about how survival isn't about beating someone, it's about not becoming them. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, but the sound didn't fill me with pride. It filled me with calm, like the world had finally caught up to the quiet I'd been living in all along. After the gala, a woman approached me backstage. She was older, elegant, the kind of person who carried herself like she'd seen every kind of loss and still stood tall. "You said something tonight," she said, "about not becoming them. I needed to hear that." I smiled. "So did I." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you." Then she walked away. I stood there for a while, watching the empty chairs, the stage lights fading to black. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like closure wearing its Sunday best. A few nights later, I sat outside watching the stars. The sea was calm, a sheet of glass beneath the moonlight. I wore the seashell bracelet Carla had made. It clicked softly against my wrist each time the breeze shifted. Ethan called just to say goodnight. It had become our routine. We didn't talk about the past anymore. We talked about tomorrow, the mundane things, like weather or dinner plans. It felt like a luxury to have nothing heavy left between us. After I hung up, I leaned back in the chair and let the silence stretch. I thought about the night of the party, the flash of the champagne, the crowd, the moment everything shifted. If I could go back, I wouldn't change anything. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Some people need to lose everything before they remember who they are. June arrived, and the house smelled of salt and lemon polish. I opened all the windows, let the summer air in. On the desk in the study, I placed a new journal. The first page stayed blank for days. Then one morning I wrote, "Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the decision to stop listening to what doesn't matter." I closed the book and smiled. Outside, the tide rolled in, steady and patient, the same tide that had carried every version of me away, the young woman, the widow, the mother, the fighter. Now, what was left was simple, a woman who survived and finally learned how to rest. As the sun set, I stood on the porch, the shells at my wrist glinting in the light. I raised my glass of water, not to anyone, not to anything lost, but to the quiet that followed. "To calm seas," I whispered, "and the strength to stay afloat." The waves answered back, soft and steady, the way forgiveness always does. Summer settled in with its heavy air and long afternoons that felt like they never ended. The days stretched wide and golden, spilling sunlight through the kitchen windows until everything inside the house seemed softer. I had stopped marking the calendar. Time didn't feel like something I needed to keep track of anymore. It just existed, quietly like the tide. Most mornings began the same. Coffee, sea breeze, the low hum of life starting over. I still walked down to the dock, sometimes barefoot, sometimes with my cup in hand. The water had grown warmer, and small fish darted close enough to break the reflection of my face. Every ripple reminded me how change doesn't have to roar, it can arrive quietly, just by existing. Ethan came by every Sunday now, no more phone calls or short visits. He brought groceries, fixed whatever small thing broke, then stayed for dinner. The silence between us had turned into something peaceful. He told me about the new job, the people there, a few who remembered his last name from the papers. He didn't avoid the topic anymore. He just refused to let it define him. "She wrote again," he said one evening, setting down his fork. I looked up from my plate. "Ava?" He nodded. She's in Seattle now, working at some wellness clinic, said she's doing better. That's good, I said. He hesitated. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry. I didn't reply. The ocean wind moved through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and cut grass. Ethan took a sip of water and said softly, "Do you believe her?" "I believe she's trying," I said. "That's a start." He smiled a little. "You're kinder than I expected you to be." "No," I said. "Just finished being angry." That night, after he left, I went out to the porch. The moon was full, sitting heavy over the horizon. I thought about all the things people carry, guilt, pride, fear, and how heavy they feel until you finally set them down. Somewhere inside, the phone buzzed. I let it ring. When it stopped, the silence that followed felt clean. The next day, Ruth called. "You've been hiding again," she teased. "Are you ever coming to town?" "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm resting." "Well, rest on the drive over. The cafe's still got your seat by the window." I smiled. "Fine, tomorrow." When I arrived, she was already there, 2 cups of coffee waiting. We talked for hours about her grandkids, the weather, nothing important. That's how you know you've healed, when you can talk about nothing and still feel full. As I got up to leave, she said, "You ever think about writing a book? You've got enough story for 10. "I've lived it," I said. "That's enough." "Maybe," she said, "but some stories deserve to be told." I didn't answer, but her words followed me all the way home. That evening, I pulled an old typewriter from the closet. My husband bought it for me decades ago, back when we couldn't afford much, but always found a way to dream bigger. The keys still worked, though the ribbon had faded. I replaced it, sat down, and fed the first sheet of paper through. For a long time, I didn't type a word. Then I started with what I knew. I never meant to be a survivor. I just refused to disappear. The words echoed softly in the room, as if the air itself was listening. A week later, I received a letter from the foundation. They wanted to feature my mentorship program in a magazine. A story of resilience, the editor called it. I laughed when I read that line. People love resilience as long as it's wrapped neatly, like pain that's been house-trained. Still, I agreed. The article came out with a photo of me on the porch, the ocean behind me. The caption read, "After everything, she still smiles." It felt strange, seeing my face tied to words like strength and courage. They never show the part where you almost gave up, where you sat in the dark wondering if silence could eat you alive. That part stays between you and the night. One afternoon, the sky broke open with rain. Heavy, sudden, relentless. I watched from the window as the garden filled with puddles. The flowers bent but didn't break. Their resilience looked quieter than mine, but stronger somehow. I stepped outside anyway, letting the rain soak through my hair, my clothes, my skin. It felt like a baptism, or maybe just a reminder that you can't stay dry forever. When I came back in, dripping onto the floor, I laughed out loud. It startled me. I hadn't heard that sound in years. Later that week, Ethan called again. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said. "You should come with me next month. I'm speaking at a business conference in Denver. You could share your story." "I don't think I need to," I said. "It's not a story anymore. It's just my life." He laughed softly. "Then maybe people need to hear how life can keep going after everything. Maybe someday," I said. But I knew I wouldn't. Some stories are meant to be lived, not performed. That night, I sat on the couch with a glass of water, the ocean murmuring outside. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and the sea. I glanced at the typewriter on the table, 3 pages filled now, the rest blank. I wasn't in a rush to finish. Maybe the story didn't need an ending. The clock ticked softly. The moonlight spilled across the floor, pale and gentle. I thought about Ava again. Not with anger, not with pity, just with understanding. Everyone pays for what they take. Some pay with guilt, some with time. I had paid too, but mine was different. I paid by learning to keep living. Weeks passed, and the typewriter pages multiplied. Each night I added something, memories, fragments, lessons I didn't know I'd kept. It wasn't a memoir. It was a map, a record of how I found my way back to myself. Sometimes I'd read a line out loud, and the words felt like company. I built my life out of second chances. Some were given, most were stolen. In late August, the mentorship group surprised me with a small celebration. They called it Gratitude Night. I tried to decline, but they insisted. When I arrived, the room was filled with candles and laughter. The women presented me with a framed photo of all of us together, signed with messages. "You saved us," one of them said. "No," I replied. "You just learned how to save yourselves." Carla smiled through tears. "We wouldn't have started without you." "Starting is the hardest part," I said. "After that, the rest is just living." They clapped, and for the first time I didn't shrink from the sound. That night, I drove home under a sky full of stars. I rolled the windows down, let the wind rush in, carrying the scent of summer fields. For once, I didn't think about the past. I didn't replay the party or the betrayal or the aftermath. I just breathed. When I reached the house, I stood by the water, the same place where it all began. The dock, the moonlight, the sea whispering like an old friend. I raised my glass to the night. "To what's gone," I said softly, "and to what's finally stayed." The waves shimmered, catching the reflection of the moon, and I realized that survival isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of peace. September came with a different kind of stillness. The air had cooled, the ocean lost its shimmer and turned a deeper, quieter blue. The days shortened and the evenings carried that familiar smell of salt and memory. I could feel the seasons shifting inside me too, like something old had finally exhaled. I kept the windows open most days. The sound of the waves was better than any music. Sometimes, when the wind picked up, I could hear the echo of the past, the laughter from that party, the clinking of glasses, but it no longer hurt. It was just sound now, stripped of meaning. The mentorship program continued, though I'd passed most of the leadership to Carla and the others. Watching them take over filled me with a quiet pride. They didn't need me anymore. That was the whole point. One afternoon, as I packed up after class, Carla stopped me at the door. "We've been nominated for a community award," she said. Her eyes sparkled. "They want you to attend." "I'm not good with ceremonies," I told her. She smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just be there." I nodded. "We'll see." That night, I sat on the porch with my tea, watching the horizon fade. The first stars began to appear, soft as whispers. I thought about what she'd said. Be there. It sounded simple, but I'd spent most of my life being everywhere for everyone else except myself. Maybe it was time. The next morning, I found the old black dress I used to wear for company events. It still fit, though my shoulders had narrowed and my posture had changed. I hung it on the back of the door and smiled. It wasn't about vanity anymore. It was about closure, dressed as grace. The award night arrived with the smell of autumn rain. The event was held in the same country club where my retirement party once took place. I almost laughed at the irony. The chandeliers, the polished floors, the sound of glasses. It was all there, untouched by the years that had changed everything else. People greeted me warmly, some pretending not to remember the old rumours. I smiled anyway. They could keep their versions of the story. I had mine. When they called our program's name, the applause was real. Carla walked up first, radiant, and motioned for me to join her. I hesitated only a second before following. The light on stage was bright, almost blinding. As they handed us the plaque, I caught my reflection in the silver plate. For a moment, I saw not the woman who'd been betrayed or the one who'd survived, but someone simpler. Whole. I didn't give a speech, but when the host leaned toward me and said, "Do you want to say a few words?" I nodded once. "I learned something," I said, voice steady. "That life doesn't hand out justice the way we imagine. Sometimes it comes as silence, sometimes it comes as peace, and sometimes it's just waking up one morning and realizing you're still here." The room was quiet, no applause, just stillness, the kind of quiet that feels like understanding. Then someone clapped, and soon the whole room followed. I stepped down from the stage, my heart calm. For the first time, I didn't feel watched. I felt seen. Later that night, Ethan called. He'd seen a photo online. "You looked beautiful," he said. I smiled. "It was just a dress." "It wasn't the dress, Mom. It was the way you stood, like you were done carrying things that didn't belong to you anymore." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe I finally am." The next morning, the mail brought a small package. No return address again, but I knew before I opened it. Inside was a folded note and a small pendant, a simple silver heart. "Myrtle, You don't owe me anything, but I wanted to send this, not as an apology, but as acknowledgement. You were stronger than I ever realized. I hope you keep teaching others to be too. I turned the pendant over. On the back she'd engraved one word, resilient. I didn't wear it. I placed it in a drawer beside the letters, not out of bitterness, out of finality. As the weeks went on, the typewriter pages grew into a small stack. I didn't know what the pages would become. A book, maybe, or just a memory. But each word felt like reclaiming something that had been taken. Ruth came over one afternoon to read a few. She stopped halfway through a page and looked up at me. "You really are done with it, aren't you?" she asked. "With her, yes," I said. "With what she did, yes. But not with living," she smiled. "You're starting again." "No," I said. "I'm continuing." The days shortened further. The evenings came earlier. I began to light candles at night again, not for sadness, but for company. The glow felt like breathing. Ethan dropped by one evening with something behind his back. "Close your eyes," he said. When I opened them, he handed me a framed photo. It was from the award night, me and Carla standing under the lights, holding the plaque, both of us smiling. Underneath he'd written, "You didn't just survive, Mom. You created survivors." I touched the glass. "Thank you." He kissed the top of my head before leaving. "You taught me what strength really looks like." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, listening to the soft crash of the waves. The moonlight traced lines across the water. I thought about how every moment, every wound had brought me here, to this quiet, steady peace. I whispered into the night, "If anyone's listening, tell him I did okay. Tell him I finally found stillness." The wind moved through the trees like an answer. In the weeks that followed, I finished the manuscript. On the last page I wrote, "If you've lost yourself, don't rush to find the old version back. She's gone. Build someone new out of what remains, and when people ask how you survived, just smile. They wouldn't understand that surviving isn't the hard part. Staying gentle after is." I pulled the page free and placed it on top of the others. The final Sunday of September was bright and warm. I invited a few of the women from the programme for dinner. We sat around the long table, laughter echoing through the house that once knew only silence. As they left, Carla hugged me tightly. "You saved my life," she said again. "No," I whispered. "You just reminded me what mine was worth." After they left, I stood by the window and watched the sun sink below the water. The light faded slowly, painting everything gold. I raised my glass one last time to no one and everyone. "To what tried to break me," I said softly, "and to the woman it built instead." The ocean shimmered, quiet and endless, like it understood. October arrived with its familiar chill and a thin fog that rolled in from the ocean each morning. The air carried the smell of damp leaves and sea salt, the kind of scent that feels both old and alive. I had grown to love this season. It didn't demand anything, it just existed, quietly fading and renewing all at once. The mentorship group slowed down for the holidays. Most of the women were busy with their families or new projects. I didn't mind the pause. The silence felt earned. I spent my mornings writing and my afternoons tending to the garden. The flowers were gone now, replaced by herbs and the last of the late tomatoes. I didn't plant them for beauty. I planted them to remind myself that growth doesn't have to be seen to be real. Ethan came by with a box of firewood and 2 mugs of hot cider. "You're turning into a hermit," he said, setting the wood by the fireplace. "I prefer retired philosopher," I replied. He laughed. "You know, Mom, you could come stay at my place for a while, closer to town, less lonely." "I'm not lonely," I said simply. "I'm just settled." He nodded, understanding more than I expected. "You're really at peace, aren't you?" "I am," I said, "but peace isn't the same as forgetting." He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't have to. That night, I reread some of the old journal pages, the ones written when everything was falling apart. The ink had faded, but the words still carried the same ache. "I don't know how to keep going," one entry read. "Everything feels heavier than I am." I traced the sentence with my finger, then turned the page to see the date. It was from 2 years ago. I almost didn't recognize the woman who wrote it. I whispered to her, "You made it." The house was quiet, but I could almost hear her sigh in relief. A few days later, I received a call from Carla. We've been offered a grant, she said excitedly. A real one, from the state. It could expand our program into other towns. That's wonderful, I said. They want you to oversee it, at least for the first few months. I smiled into the phone. Carla, whole point was for you to lead. I know, she said, but we still need you to guide us. I thought for a moment. I'll help. Quietly. She laughed. You wouldn't know how to do it any other way. That evening, Ruth stopped by with a pie, her hands wrapped in her old red scarf. You've been too quiet, she said. What are you plotting? I'm not plotting, I said. Just watching life do what it does. She chuckled. You say things like that and make me feel like I should take notes. We ate pie by the fire, the light flickering against the walls. She talked about her family, her health, the little aches that come with age. Then she looked at me and said, You ever think about love again? I sipped my tea before answering. Not the kind that needs to be chased. She smiled knowingly. So the quiet kind? Yes, I said, the kind that already lives here. A week later, I woke to the sound of rain. It fell steady, rhythmic, like an old clock keeping time. I made breakfast, set a place for one, and ate slowly, watching the grey sky melt into the ocean. For years, I used to dread mornings like this, grey, heavy, too still. Now they felt like permission to rest. When the mail came, I found another letter from Ava. The handwriting was smaller now, unsure. Myrtle, I don't expect a reply. I just wanted to tell you I got married again. It's different this time. I've learned things I didn't want to learn the hard way. I'm trying to live better. I hope you're well. I folded the letter, looked out the window for a long time, then said softly, Good. I didn't keep this one. I burned it in the fireplace. The paper curled quickly, the ink disappearing into ash. I didn't do it out of anger, but out of release. Some things deserve to disappear completely. Later that week, I finished editing my manuscript. The pages filled a neat stack now, bound with twine. I titled it The Quiet After. It wasn't meant for publishing, it was meant for Ethan. For when I wasn't here to tell the story myself, I slipped it into a box along with the photo from the award night and the bracelet from Carla. On the box, I wrote, for when you need to remember where you come from. The following weekend, Ethan and I drove up the coast. The road wound through cliffs and forests, the kind of drive that forces you to slow down. We stopped at a small diner halfway there, ordered pancakes and talked about nothing important. When he dropped me off later, he hugged me longer than usual. You know, he said quietly, every time I think about what happened, I realize you never lost your dignity. Not once. Dignity isn't something they can take, I said. It's something you hand over. He smiled. You never handed it over. No, I said. And I never will. That night, I lit a candle by the window. The flame flickered low, reflecting in the glass. Outside, the waves moved slow and sure, like they'd been waiting for this kind of calm. I thought about my husband again, his voice, his laughter, the way he believed in things even when life made it hard to. I whispered into the dark, You were right, it was all worth it. The house seemed to breathe with me then, the way old houses do when they finally feel at rest. Winter was coming again, but I didn't dread it. The chill, the fog, the shorter days, all of it felt like an old rhythm returning. In the evenings, I read the letters from the women in the mentorship program, notes of thanks, updates, photographs. Every story carried a piece of what I'd fought for, quiet resilience, unshakable grace. I kept them in a wooden box near the fireplace. My legacy, not built in money or property, but in strength that multiplied. As November turned colder, I found myself standing on the dock again. The sea was calm, the air crisp. I looked out at the horizon, the sky a soft shade of silver. The gulls flew low, their wings brushing the mist. I closed my eyes and listened. The sound of the water, the wind, the quiet. It was everything I had left and everything I ever needed. For the first time, I didn't think about what came next. I just let the world be still around me. And in that stillness, I finally understood what all of it had been for. Not to teach me how to survive, but to remind me how to live without fear. The winter light came thin and quiet, spilling across the floorboards like silk. I woke before the sun, as I always did, the sound of the sea moving softly against the rocks below. The world outside was grey and still, but not lonely, just calm. The kettle hissed on the stove and I poured my tea, wrapping both hands around the mug. My reflection flickered in the window, a face older, softer, but alive. I stood there for a while, breathing in the steam, feeling the warmth travel through my fingers. Every scar, every betrayal, every quiet victory had led me here, to this morning that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. The garden was bare now, but the soil was dark and rich. The air smelled of salt and pine. I stepped outside, shawl over my shoulders, and walked the short path to the dock. The boards creaked beneath my feet, the same sound they had made all those years ago, but it no longer spoke of emptiness. It sounded like memory. Out beyond the horizon, the sea stretched wide and endless. The water shimmered faintly beneath the first blush of light. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone, just to life itself, for giving me another chance to begin again. Later that morning, Ethan arrived with groceries. He'd started doing that without asking, slipping back into the rhythm of our old life. But different now, gentler, unspoken. He carried the bags into the kitchen and started unpacking them. "You didn't have to," I said. He smiled. "I know, but I wanted to." He looked around, noticing the open windows, the stack of pages on the table, the candle still flickering by the window. "You've been writing again," he said. "Yes," I answered. "It keeps me honest." He took a deep breath. "You ever think about publishing it?" I shook my head. "Some stories are meant to stay small, just enough for the people who need them." He nodded. "Then promise me I'll get to read it one day." "You will," I said, smiling. That afternoon, we built a fire and sat quietly, each of us lost in thought. The flames crackled softly, the smell of wood filling the room. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling faintly through the eaves. Ethan spoke first. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" I asked. "Any of it, the party. What happened after?" I stirred the fire. "No," I said. "If it hadn't happened, I might still be the woman who believed silence was the same as peace." He nodded slowly. "You were right all along." "About what?" "About her. About how love without respect is just dependence dressed up as devotion." I smiled faintly. "You learned." I had a good teacher. We didn't need to say more. The fire said it for us. When evening came, he kissed my cheek and left, headlights disappearing down the drive. The house fell silent again, but it wasn't heavy. The kind of silence that holds warmth instead of sorrow. I walked through each room, touching the edges of my life. The piano, the framed photos, the small wooden box by the mantel. I opened it one last time. Inside were the letters, the bracelet, the photo, and the manuscript tied with ribbon. The story of everything that had broken and mended. I traced the top page with my fingertips. The quiet after. I smiled. It was no longer a title. It was my truth. That night, I sat by the window watching the waves. The moonlight stretched across the water, soft and silver, like the world was exhaling. I thought about my husband again, his laughter in the kitchen, the warmth of his hands on mine. "I kept it all together," I whispered, even when it fell apart. The words hung in the air, steady and sure. I picked up the seashell bracelet and slipped it around my wrist. The shells clicked softly, the sound small but grounding. In that moment, I realized the story had never been about revenge or loss or survival. It had been about returning to myself, to grace, to a quiet that didn't demand explanation. The storm had passed long ago. I was still standing. Weeks passed and winter deepened. The world slowed again, soft and kind. I sent the final edits of the mentorship proposal to Carla, signed my name with a firm hand and sealed the envelope. "Your turn now," I wrote on the note inside. When I stepped outside to mail it, the morning air bit cold against my face. I watched the ocean one last time before heading back inside. The sea no longer looked endless. It looked familiar, like something I'd finally learned to live beside instead of through. That evening, I poured myself a small glass of champagne, the same brand they'd served at my retirement party years ago. I set it on the table, beside a photo of my younger self standing next to my husband, both of us smiling like the future would always be kind. I lifted the glass, felt the bubbles rise. "To forgiveness," I whispered. "Not because they deserve it, but because I do." I took a sip. It was dry, sharp, alive. The clock ticked softly. The sea answered back. And in that quiet, everything finally settled into place. The next morning, the world was pale with frost. The first snow of the season fell light and slow, dusting the windowsills and the dock. I watched it gather, remembering all the winters before, how each one felt like an ending that turned out to be another beginning. I walked to the garden and brushed the snow from the wooden bench. The cold bit through my gloves, but I didn't mind. I sat, listening to the wind move through the bare branches. From here, I could see the sea, the same horizon that had watched me survive every version of myself. I thought of everything I'd lost, everything I'd learned, and everything I'd chosen to keep, and then, quietly, I said, "I'm home." The wind carried the words away, the sky blushed pink, the sea glimmered under the light. I stayed there until the sun rose fully, the warmth brushing my face. The past no longer felt like a weight, it felt like soil, rich and deep, holding the roots of who I'd become. Inside, the house waited, my story waited, the life I'd rebuilt waited. I closed the door gently, the sound echoing soft and final. Then I smiled, the kind of smile that only comes when you've walked through fire and found peace waiting on the other side. The story had begun with a glass of champagne meant to destroy me. It ended with another, raised to the life I reclaimed. And that, I decided, was the truest kind of justice there is.